Today's flight in the EMB-110 Bandeirante will take us from Grand Canyon National Park Airport to Flagstaff Pulliam Airport, and we'll be flying in spotty IMC conditions. Surface winds will allow us to use the ILS runway 21 approach, so I get a chance to try out an ILS landing in this aircraft. So first thing after our walk around is our pre-start checklist. So confirming the aircraft documents are in hand, and seats, belts, and pedals are situated. Parking brake checks on. Landing gear levers down, flaps are fully up, the thrust is at idle, propellers will move to full, and fuel is at cutoff. Then activate the master battery. So let's pause here for a moment to take in the first of several mistakes I noticed when reviewing post-flight. I meant to switch this to external power, but flipped it up to the onboard battery instead. Take too long in the avionics before engines start like this and we won't be going anywhere. Alright, radios are active, and set the transponder to standby. Fuel quantity checks, fuel pumps and crossfeed are off, autopilot is off, and then checking left and right voltmeters, and we're good there. And pitot heat is off. Passenger seat belt and no smoking lights on. Nav and anti-collision lights are on. Inverters should be activated here, but that's my second checklist miss. Inertial separators are off. Fire warning test is good. Enunciator test is good. Next up, we'll get the flight plan entered into the GPS. Our route will take the Grand 4 departure southwest to Bicep waypoint, then south to Navajo, then Casey, where we'll turn southeast to the FLG VOR, where we'll transition to the ILS runway 21 approach, with a procedure turn up at the Zaymab intersection. I need to add the GCN VOR frequency at 111.65 so we can use that for our Grand 4 departure procedure. So at takeoff, we'll immediately follow runway heading at 210 degrees to 7,000 feet and then turn left at 178 degrees to intercept the 196 radial off of that GCN VOR. So I'll set 196 degrees into the HSI. And then we'll move to the heading bug and get that to the runway departure heading in case it's needed. And then after that, set our cruise altitude in the autopilot. Then we can grab local ATIS info and set local pressure in the altimeter. Check of flight instruments looks good, doors are closed, and ground equipment is removed, so we'll proceed with engine start. Fuel pumps are on, left engine starter on, and then we'll wait for 10% RPM. And now left fuel lever to full. And we'll wait for stabilization. Nice reflection there. Stabilized. And left starter off. And we'll turn on the right starter. Side's at 10%. Move that fuel lever to full. Okay, all stabilized. Right starter off. Here I discover my earlier mistake with the battery switch, so we'll just leave that where it is. And generators 1 and 2 on. And then second mistake discovered, inverters 1 and 2 should have already been on. Voltimeters check. And we switch those inertial separators on. Then we'll get our IFR clearance to Flagstaff taken care of.
Canyon ground 607-112 tree ready to copy IFR clearance to Flagstaff.
607-112 tree is cleared to Flagstaff Airport as filed. Takeoff runway 21 climb and maintain 11,000 feet. Departure frequency is 124.85 squawk 0065.
607-112 tree cleared to Flagstaff Airport as filed. Takeoff runway 21 climb and maintain 11,000 feet. Departure on 124.85 squawk 0065.
607-112 tree readback is correct. Contact ground on 121.9er when ready to taxi.
Okay, we've got a drop cleared altitude down by 1,000 feet. We've briefed our departure, and avionics, GPS, and autopilot are set for our route. Transponders in standby mode, altimeter is up to date, fuel pumps are on, and leaving cross feed off. Taxi lights on, pitot heat on, passenger heat on. And with cold temperatures, rain, snow, and cloud cover, we'll definitely want anti-icing for our flight. Flaps down 1 notch to 20%.
Canyon ground 607-112 tree.
Flight controls check out and
IFR.
request taxi clearance.
607-112 tree taxi to and hold short of runway 21 using taxiway Papa Bravo Alpha. Contact tower on 119.0 when ready.
Taxi to and hold short runway 21 via taxiway Papa Bravo Alpha 607-112 tree.
I'm not sure I'd call this a mistake in the sense of the sim environment where the ground crew predictably lingers in harm's way or literally walks into it. But I honestly could have taken a minute to reverse thrust backward a bit rather than pretend they're not there. But there we go. Alright, parking brake on for a moment and run-up checklist now. So thrust levers are at idle, propellers are at maximum, fuel condition is at 100, switching transponder on to alt mode, and turning on the air conditioning. Flight instruments are good, and annunciators okay. Flaps are at 20%. Flight controls check. Aileron and rudder trim check at 0, and then moving the pitch trim to takeoff range. Next, turning on yaw damper and flight director. And turn these controls out of my way for just a sec, and propeller sync checks as off. Auto feather is on. Inertial separation check is on. Switch anti-collision lights from rotating to on, and then ask for our clearance departure.
Canyon Tower 607-112 tree ready for departure runway 21 IFR to Flagstaff. 607-112 tree altimeter 29.77 wind 220 and 32. Cleared for takeoff runway 21. Cleared for takeoff runway 21 607-112 tree.
So holding brakes while we bring power to 50%. And then release to full power. Okay, so keep an eye on the HSI indicator. The assumption is that following the runway heading until 7,000 feet altitude will require a left turn to re-intercept the GCN 196 radial outbound. In terms of scale, I way overestimated how far off the radial I would be when I turned left to intercept it. Honestly, as quickly as we reached 7,000 feet, I could have made a slight right turn directly onto the radial.
Los Angeles Center.
However, I got hyper-focused on banking to the advised 178-degree left turn for that intercept while I was watching altitude and airspeed for flaps up, and totally overshot the radial. Like, why is a CDI needle way off to my right? Drat. And demerit. Switching autopilot to nav mode, and we're on our way back to the correct outbound departure route.
Cathay 907 traffic is 3 o'clock 1 miles at flight level 320 generic. Report them in sight. Cathay 907 have the traffic.
so that distraction has me running behind on the climb checklist. And this is why there are co-pilots. Landing gear checks up, flaps are up, switching auto feather off, propeller sync switches on, switching inertial separation off, taxi lights are off and cutting landing lights too. Engine instruments check normal, and we take thrust and propeller down to 90%. Climb speed should run from 130 to 160 knots.
Going to 127.55 southwest 4614.
I'm going to spend the next fast forward few minutes trying to negotiate 13,000 feet out of ATC. Meanwhile, some spectacular skies over the Coconino Plateau as we cruise southwestward.
WestJet 1770 traffic alert.
27 has the traffic.
WestJet 1770 contact Albuquerque Center on 128.45. Good day. 607.112 you are 400 feet above your assigned altitude. Descend and maintain. Request 13,000 feet. 607.112 climb and maintain 13,000 feet. Climb and maintain 13,000 feet, 607.112 tree.
Okay, short seatbelt respite for any urgent trips to the lavatory. Running about 5 minutes late on the cruise checklist, but I'm not ready to tick up the error tally for that. Propeller sync checks as on, and thrust and propeller reducing to about 60%.
Los Angeles Center, American 686 is passing flight level 280, descending 10,000 feet. American 686 Los Angeles Center, continue as planned.
Time to prep the ILS approach. Swapping the 110.5 India Foxtrot Lima Golf localizer to active. And then lining the heading bug up to our current heading. It's 5 miles until the next waypoint, so we've got time to do this. Switch autopilot to heading mode to keep us on track. And then the Garmin from GPS to VLOC. The HSI needle flicks off of the GPS heading for now, and I'll turn the heading to 214 degrees for our ILS runway 21 approach. Then turn VLOC back to GPS and autopilot back to nav. Left at the KC waypoint now and heading straight for the FLG VOR. And then working to clear up my file transition with ATC. We're about to fly over Garland Prairie and the small community of parks now. Brief intermediate descent for now, but a good time to set that seatbelt sign back on and get the bathroom cleared out. So we reviewed the arrival briefing, avionics, GPS, and autopilot are set up, and ILS frequency and heading are set. Last night's snowfall is showing up nicely on the higher terrain down there. Passing just south of Bellemont and the Camp Navajo Ordnance Depot now. On the right side of the plane, hidden beneath clouds at the moment, are a couple of lengthy, miles-long tornado scars running southward through the forest. They were left by 2 of the 9 tornadoes that occurred during the largest recorded Arizona tornado outbreak on October 6, 2010. You should give this area a flyover in clear weather sometime if you're interested in those kind of things. And then the snow-covered San Francisco peaks are getting closer to the left. Those are the remnants of an ancient stratovolcano that blew its top, leaving the jagged mountain that anchors the landscape today. Banking left over the FLG, Foxtrot Lima Golf VOR gives a great view of Flagstaff from directly over Pulliam Airport. The Interstate 40 and 17 interchange is the clearest landmark below. There's the white circle of the NAU Sky Dome showing up prominently too on the southern end of the campus. From here, we're closing in on 20 miles from touchdown, so we can start the approach checklist. Propeller sync is off. Auto feather on. Altimeter has been updated. inertial separation is on. And adjusting propellers to maximum. Flying over Doney Park now with Highway 89 winding northward toward Tuba City, Page, and the east entry to Grand Canyon National Park. The smaller cinder hills of the San Francisco volcanic field dimple the forest beneath this area where we make our procedure turn. Sunset Crater over here has its own national monument, and it's absolutely worth a visit if you're ever in the area. Reducing power to get airspeed down to 140 knots as we enter the procedure turn, and first level of flaps down.
Flagstaff Tower 607 112 tree 22 miles northeast inbound ILS runway 21 approach. 607 112 tree Flagstaff Tower. Altimeter 29.82.
I've let airspeed get away from me and right at the threshold of maximum for flaps. Reducing power to get that back under
Cleared
control.
ILS runway 21 approach 607
Hit second level of flaps and switch to V-lock as we begin slowing that down to 120 knots. At this point, I'm considering how soon before female waypoint to switch to approach mode on the autopilot and how to address the situation if that doesn't work as expected, while also working to keep a closer eye on airspeed for sure. Female is a little over 5 nautical miles out at this point and where the glide slope should capture. What I'm missing is that I should have started my descent to 10,200 feet coming out of the procedure turn way before reaching female. Plugging my decision altitude into the autopilot here, plus 100 feet for added measure. And centering up the heading bug for missed approach if needed. As I'm doing this, I'm finally noticing how the glide slope indicator is presented on the ASI and HSI, and how disappointingly far above it I currently am. 2.5 miles from female, 1,500 feet too high, and I'm finally hitting approach. Wow, beautifully enough, she caught the glide slope after my bad form and immediately started descending at 1,500 feet per minute to catch up. And I can hear all the loose change rolling toward the cockpit. I'm tagging that with a 1.5 because things would go a lot smoother if I wasn't catching up on the descent, and because I want to even that fraction out. Reaching FEMA, we've caught up to about 350 feet above Glideslope, so I may actually be spared a missed approach. The rapid descent has allowed airspeed to crank up to 145 knots when I should be at 120, and actually ready to slow down to 100, so I need to get a handle on that. The ILS for runway 21 passes nearly over my home, and we're flying over that now. At have new waypoint, 4.5 miles out and dropping full flaps. I'm 100 feet below the glide slope here and attributing that to poor management of airspeed. And in general through this whole approach. I'm giving myself another ding for that overall. And gear down. Airspeed's rapidly dropping with full flaps, so I'm going to full power. Cruising through IMC conditions now with maybe a half-mile visibility, so not surprisingly the runway and its lights are not revealing themselves yet. Keeping very close tabs on the altimeter and getting ready for go-around. $7,500 feet, and I'm cutting autopilot now so I can drag onto the glide slope and be ready for missed approach. correcting a bit after drifting to the right of the localizer, and just caught a flicker of runway lights where I'm banking. Fairly high here, but just under 100 knots descending down onto it, and that'll be manageable. Wow, heavy snow squall moving across the runway just now. On the ground with plenty of runway to spare.
To 121.9er, 607.112 tree.
Flagstaff Airport information, contact 2000 Zulu. Wind 230 and 24. Visibility.
Flagstaff ground, 607.112 tree, taxi to parking.
607.112 taxi to general aviation parking by the taxiway Alpha 6 Alpha.
After landing checklist,
Taxi to fuel
where we find my
607.112
next miss. I didn't turn on landing lights on approach, but I can turn on taxi lights now at least. Transponder to standby. Pitot heat off. Anti-ice off. Auto feather off. And flaps up. Aileron and rudder trim, check 0. Pretty big passenger jet for Flagstaff. Not totally out of the question. And coming in for a smooth stop at the Green Goblin Mental Institution. I mean the Flagstaff Pulliam Photogrammetry Airport. Parking brake. Taxi lights off. Seat belts off. Grab those bags and fire up those smartphones. Thrust at idle. Propellers to minimum. Fuel to cut off. Inertial separators off. Inverters off. Generators off. Fuel pumps off. Nav and collision lights off. And passenger heat off. And air conditioning off. Now to get that ground equipment up and pop open the door and release everyone into the wild. Here we are back in Flagstaff, where a haze of snow truly does materialize out of thin air some days. Pack up the iPad and battery off to power it all down. So there were 8 things I tallied that clearly showed room for improvement. Let me know what else you saw. This plane continues to be really enjoyable to fly, and I'm learning a lot along the way. I hope you enjoyed the trip with me.